The telegram arrived on the hottest day of August in 1877, smudged ink announcing that Zelda Ramsey's father had been killed in a mining accident 300 miles north. And she stood on the porch of the Unionville, Nevada boarding house reading those words over and over until they stopped making sense. Her jaw locked tight and her eyes burning but absolutely dry. She had learned early in her 21 years that tears were a weapon people used against you, that vulnerability meant weakness, and weakness meant losing everything in a world that already took more than it gave. Her mother had cried when the influenza swept through their Missouri homestead 8 years ago, cried until there was nothing left, and then she had simply laid down beside Zelda's 3 younger siblings and never gotten up again. Zelda had been 13, standing in that cabin doorway with dirt under her fingernails from digging graves her father refused to dig, and she had sworn then that she would never let anyone see her break. Now her father was gone too, and she had nothing except the clothes in her worn carpetbag, $17 stitched into the hem of her skirt, and a stubborn pride that had kept her spine straight through every hardship since. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Chen, watched from the doorway with sympathetic eyes that Zelda could not bear to meet. Sympathy was just another word for pity, and pity made her feel like she was drowning. "I will settle my account and be gone by morning," Zelda said, her voice steady as stone. "You have nowhere to go, girl. Your father's claim will be seized for his debts. Stay here. I can always use help with the laundry and cooking." It was a generous offer, probably more generous than Zelda deserved given that she had only been in Unionville for 3 weeks, having followed her father here when he wrote about silver strikes and new opportunities. But the thought of staying in this town where everyone would know her as the orphaned girl, the one to be pitied and whispered about, made her stomach turn. She needed to be somewhere she could stand on her own, where her father's death was just another tragedy in a world full of them, not the defining fact of her existence. "Thank you, but I will manage," Zelda said, folding the telegram with precise creases and tucking it into her pocket. That night, she lay awake in the narrow boarding house bed, staring at the ceiling and feeling the weight of grief pressing down on her chest like a boulder. Her throat ached with unshed tears, her eyes burned, but she held everything in with the iron will that had become her greatest survival skill. She thought about her father's laugh, the way he had tried so hard to make a good life for them after Missouri, always chasing the next opportunity, the next promise of prosperity. He had not been a perfect man, but he had loved her in his way, and now there was nobody left in the world who remembered her as a child, who knew where she came from, but she would not cry. Crying changed nothing. The next morning, Zelda counted her money, paid Mrs. Chen, and walked through Unionville with her carpetbag in hand, looking for work. The town was small, dusty, clinging to the side of the Humboldt Range like it might slide off at any moment. Silver had brought people here, and silver kept them, but it was a hard life and everyone had the worn-down look of those who worked too much for too little. She tried the general store first, then the restaurant, then the laundry. Nobody was hiring, or if they were, they took one look at her traveling alone and decided she was not the kind of woman they wanted working for them. By afternoon, with the sun beating down mercilessly and her money growing tighter in her imagination, Zelda found herself standing outside the Silver Dollar Saloon, weighing her options. She was not naive enough to think saloon work was respectable, but she was also not naive enough to think respectability filled an empty stomach. The door swung open and a tall man stepped out, nearly colliding with her. "Pardon me, miss," he said, tipping his hat. Zelda stepped back and looked up at him. He was probably 26 or 27, With dark hair that needed cutting and gray eyes that held a peculiar kindness she distrusted immediately. He wore dusty riding clothes and a gun belt that sat comfortable on his hips like he knew how to use it but did not particularly want to. There was something solid about him, like he was rooted to the earth in a way most drifting cowboys were not. "Are you looking for someone?" he asked when she did not respond. "Work," Zelda said flatly. "Do you know if they are hiring?" His expression shifted, becoming careful. "For what kind of work?" "Whatever kind pays." He studied her for a moment, and Zelda lifted her chin, daring him to judge her. She had been judged plenty in her life, and it had stopped mattering years ago. But instead of judgment, his expression softened into something that looked almost like concern. "My name is Ryder Finch," he said. "I run a horse ranch about 5 miles south of town. I could use help with the books and the household management. My sister used to handle it, but she got married and moved to California 6 months ago, and I have made a mess of everything since." Zelda's first instinct was to refuse. She did not want charity disguised as employment, did not want to be beholden to a stranger's kindness. But when she looked at Ryder Finch's face, she did not see pity there, just practicality. And practical she could accept. "I can read, write, and calculate," she said. "I managed my father's household accounts for years." "What are you paying?" "Room, board, and $20 a month. You would have your own cabin on the property. It is not much, but it is private and clean." $20 a month was more than fair for that kind of work, which made Zelda suspicious. "Why are you offering this to a stranger?" Ryder smiled, and it transformed his entire face from serious to approachable. "Because I am desperate, and you look like someone who gets things done. Also, you are the first person I have met today who has not tried to sell me a miracle tonic or a share in a non-existent silver mine, so that speaks well of your character." Despite everything, despite the grief sitting like lead in her stomach and the exhaustion weighing down her bones, Zelda almost smiled. Almost. Instead, she held out her hand. "Zelda Ramsey, when do I start? How about now? I have a wagon around back. We can be at the ranch before supper." She should have asked more questions, should have gotten references, or at least told someone where she was going. But Zelda had stopped believing in safety a long time ago, and Ryder Finch's offer was the best option she was likely to get. So she nodded, adjusted her grip on her carpetbag, and followed him around to the back of the saloon where a sturdy wagon waited, hitched to 2 patient-looking horses. The ride out to the ranch was mostly quiet. Ryder seemed comfortable with silence, which Zelda appreciated. She was tired of people who filled every empty space with meaningless chatter, who could not sit with their own thoughts. The landscape rolled past, all sage and rock and endless sky, and she felt something in her chest loosen just slightly. Out here, away from town and curious eyes, she could breathe. "Your father," Ryder said eventually. "I heard about the accident at the Silverbow mine. I am sorry." Zelda's jaw tightened. News travels fast. "It is a small town, people talk." He glanced at her. "He was a good man, from what I heard. Hard worker." "Yes." Ryder seemed to understand that she did not want to discuss it further, because he let the subject drop and pointed instead to a cluster of buildings appearing in the distance. "That is the ranch. I have about 40 horses right now, mostly for selling to freight companies and the cavalry. The main house is there, your cabin is the smaller one to the west, and the barn and corrals are beyond that." As they drew closer, Zelda could see that the ranch was well maintained, the fences in good repair and the buildings sturdy. This was not some ramshackle operation held together with hope and prayer. Ryder Finch clearly knew what he was doing with horses, even if his bookkeeping left something to be desired. He pulled the wagon up to the smaller cabin and helped her down. Take today to settle in. I will bring over the account books tomorrow morning and we can go through everything." "I can start now," Zelda said. "You have had a long day. Rest first." She wanted to argue, wanted to prove that she did not need coddling or special treatment, but the truth was that she was exhausted down to her bones. So she took her carpet bag and nodded. "Tomorrow, then." The cabin was indeed small, just one room with a bed, a table, a stove, and a chair. But it was clean and the bed had fresh linens, and when Zelda closed the door behind her, she was blessedly, completely alone. She set her carpet bag down, sat on the edge of the bed, and let herself feel the full weight of the day. Her father was dead. She was alone in the world. She had nothing and nobody. The grief rose up like a tide, crashing against the walls she had built so carefully, and her chest hitched with the effort of holding it back. Her eyes burned and her throat ached, and she thought, just this once, maybe she could let herself break. But the tears would not come. They sat there, dammed up behind some immovable barrier, and no matter how much she hurt, she could not seem to release them. She had held strong for too long, and now she did not know how to let go. So instead, she lay down on the bed fully clothed and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion finally dragged her under into fitful, dreamless sleep. The next morning, Zelda woke before dawn out of habit and long practice. She washed her face in the basin, changed into a clean dress, and braided her dark hair back in a severe plait. When she stepped outside, the ranch was already awake, a young man leading horses out to pasture, and the sound of hammering coming from the direction of the barn. The air was cool and fresh, not yet baked by the day's heat, and she took a moment to orient herself in this new place that was, for now at least, home. Ryder emerged from the main house carrying a stack of ledgers and papers that threatened to spill everywhere. He saw her and grinned. "Good morning. I see you are an early riser. That is good because the horses certainly are. Where would you like me to work? Kitchen table, if you do not mind. I have coffee already made, and fair warning, my organizational system is what you might call non-existent." That proved to be an understatement. Over the next several hours, Zelda sorted through 6 months of chaotic record-keeping, receipts stuffed in random pages, expenses recorded with no dates, income listed with no corresponding sales records. It was a disaster, but it was also a problem she could solve, and there was something deeply satisfying about that. While she worked, Ryder came and went, answering her questions when needed but mostly leaving her to it. By midday, she had made significant progress and had developed a grudging respect for how Ryder ran his ranch. He might be hopeless with paperwork, but his business instincts were sound. He bought horses young and cheap, trained them well, and sold them for fair prices that kept customers coming back. He treated his 2 ranch hands decently, paying them regularly and on time. He was not getting rich, but he was building something sustainable. How bad is it? Ryder asked, appearing in the doorway with 2 plates of food. "You owe considerably less than you think, and have earned considerably more. You are actually in good shape financially, you just have no system for tracking it." He set a plate in front of her, bread and cheese and some kind of dried meat. "That might be the best news I have had in months. I can set up a proper system. It will take a few days to get everything in order, but after that, maintenance should be straightforward." "You are a miracle worker, Zelda Ramsey." She looked up sharply, searching his face for mockery or condescension, but found only genuine appreciation. It unsettled her, that openness. She did not know what to do with kindness that asked for nothing in return. Over the following weeks, Zelda fell into a rhythm at the ranch. She managed the books, kept the household accounts, and gradually began taking on other tasks because she could not stand to be idle. She started cooking meals for Ryder and the ranch hands, organized the supply shed, and even helped with some of the gentler horses. The work was hard but satisfying, and for the first time since her father died, she felt like she had solid ground beneath her feet. Ryder was an easy man to work for. He was fair, patient, and had a dry sense of humor that occasionally caught her off guard. He never pried into her past or asked about her grief, but he also had a way of being present without being intrusive, of offering support through simple, steady companionship rather than empty words. She found herself relaxing around him incrementally, her defensive walls lowering just slightly. But she still had not cried. The grief was there, a constant weight, but the tears remained locked away. Sometimes late at night she would lie in her cabin and will herself to release it, but nothing came. She was broken in some fundamental way, she thought. She had sealed herself off so completely that she no longer knew how to be vulnerable, even in private. One evening in early September, a late summer storm rolled across the mountains. Zelda was in the main house finishing up some paperwork when the rain started, fat drops that quickly became a downpour. Thunder cracked overhead and the temperature dropped 20 degrees in minutes. "You should stay here tonight," Ryder said, looking out at the deluge. "That cabin is not insulated and this storm looks like it plans to settle in. I will be fine. Zelda." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "It is cold, wet, and the roof on that cabin has a leak I have not gotten around to fixing yet. Stay here. I have a spare room. It is just practical." She wanted to argue, but lightning split the sky and thunder followed immediately after, close enough to rattle the windows. Practical, he had said. She could accept practical. All right. He showed her to a small bedroom off the main hall, simply furnished but comfortable. She changed into her nightdress and climbed into bed, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. In the main room, she could hear Ryder moving around, stoking the fire, settling in for the night. There was something comforting about having another person nearby, about not being alone with her thoughts in the dark. She must have dozed off eventually, because she woke in the deep hours of the night with her heart pounding and tears streaming down her face. She had been dreaming about her father, about the last time she saw him, how he had hugged her and promised he would be careful in the mines. In the dream, she had tried to warn him, tried to make him stay, but he had gone anyway, and she had been left standing alone. The grief that had been locked away for weeks suddenly poured out in great wrenching sobs that she could not control. She pressed her hands over her mouth, trying to muffle the sound, but it was too much, too big. She was drowning in it. A soft knock came at the door. "Zelda," she could not answer, could not make words through the crying. The door opened and Ryder stood there in the dim light, his hair mussed from sleep. He took one look at her and crossed the room without asking permission, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I am sorry," she gasped out. "I am sorry, I cannot stop. I do not know why I cannot stop." "You do not have to stop," he said gently, "and you do not have to be sorry. I never cry, I do not cry in front of anyone. I know." His voice was unbearably kind, "but maybe it is time you did." She shook her head violently, trying to pull herself together, but the sobs kept coming. Years of held-back grief, not just for her father but for her mother and siblings, for every loss and hardship she had endured while keeping her face carefully blank. It all came out at once, and she could not make it stop. Ryder did something then that surprised her. He pulled her toward him, wrapping his arms around her and holding her against his chest while she fell apart. She stiffened initially, every instinct screaming at her to pull away, to hide, to protect herself. But he just held her steadily, one hand on her back and the other in her hair, and gradually she stopped fighting it. She cried into his shirt, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body, and he held her through all of it without saying a word. He did not tell her it would be all right or that time would heal or offer any of the meaningless platitudes people always gave. He just held her and let her break, and somehow that made it safe enough to finally let go completely. She did not know how long it lasted. Hours maybe, or perhaps just minutes that felt like hours. Eventually, the sobs subsided into hiccups and then into exhausted silence. She felt wrung out, emptied, but also lighter somehow, like she had been carrying a crushing weight and had finally set it down. "I am sorry," she whispered again. "Stop apologizing." His voice rumbled in his chest under her ear. "You have nothing to be sorry for. I got your shirt wet," he laughed softly. "I have others." She pulled back slightly to look at him, suddenly aware that she was in her nightdress, pressed against him in bed in the middle of the night. It should have been scandalous, should have sent her scrambling away. But his eyes held no judgment, no ulterior motive. Just warmth and understanding and something else she could not quite name. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked. "Because you deserve kindness, and because I know what it is like to lose someone and think you have to carry it alone." "Who did you lose?" "My parents, 5 years ago. Cholera outbreak. My sister and I survived, but they did not. For the longest time I thought if I just kept working, kept moving forward, I would not have to feel it. But grief does not work that way. It waits until you are ready, and then it demands its due." Zelda nodded slowly. That was exactly what had happened. She had run from her grief, had built walls around it, and it had caught up with her anyway. "Thank you," she said, "for holding me, for not making me feel weak. You are the furthest thing from weak I have ever met." Ryder brushed a strand of hair back from her face, his touch gentle. "But everyone needs someone sometimes, even the strongest people." Something shifted between them in that moment, some invisible line being crossed. Zelda felt it in the quickening of her pulse, in the way her breath caught. She realized she was still in his arms, their faces close together, and that she did not want to move away. More than that, she realized she had been falling for Ryder Finch in small increments over the past weeks, so gradually she had not noticed, until this moment when everything crystallized into sharp clarity. She must have made some small sound because his expression changed, his eyes darkening. "Zelda," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a question. She answered by closing the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a tentative kiss. For a heartbeat, he froze, and she thought she had made a terrible mistake. But then he kissed her back, one hand cupping her face while the other tightened around her waist. It was gentle and fierce all at once, full of unspoken emotion, and Zelda felt something in her chest crack open wider. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted, "but I did not want you to think I gave you this job for the wrong reasons. I did not think that. Good." He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring it. "Stay here tonight. Let me hold you." It was improper by every standard of decent society, but Zelda found she did not care. She was tired of living by rules that did nothing but make her smaller. So she nodded and settled back against him, and Ryder shifted so they were both lying down, her back to his chest, his arm secure around her waist. "Sleep," he murmured into her hair. "I have got you." And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Zelda felt safe enough to do exactly that. Over the following months, Zelda and Ryder's relationship deepened in ways that both terrified and exhilarated her. She had never let anyone get close before, had never trusted enough to lower her defenses. But Ryder had seen her at her most vulnerable and had not flinched. He had held her while she broke and had helped her put the pieces back together, and that created a foundation of trust she could build on. They were careful, conscious of propriety even in the remote ranch. Zelda continued sleeping in her cabin most nights, but they spent every evening together, talking by the fire or walking through the pastures. Ryder told her stories about growing up in Wyoming, about his dreams of building the ranch into something significant. Zelda found herself opening up too, sharing memories of her childhood in Missouri, of her mother and siblings, of the years with her father after. She learned that Ryder was patient and thoughtful, that he listened more than he spoke, and that he had a deep well of compassion for people and animals alike. She learned that he loved the early morning hours best, when the world was quiet and the horses were peaceful. She learned that he hummed when he worked, and that he had a terrible singing voice but did not care. She learned 1,000 small things that added up to falling completely, irrevocably in love, and she learned that she had been wrong about vulnerability. It was not weakness. It was the courage to be fully known, fully seen, and to trust that you would not be abandoned for it. In November, the first snow fell, dusting the mountains white and turning the valley into a landscape of stark beauty. Zelda stood on the porch of the main house watching it fall, wrapped in a shawl Ryder had given her. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Cold?" he asked. "A little. We could go inside. I have coffee brewing." She leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body. "In a minute. It is beautiful." They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the snow transform the world. Finally, Ryder turned her around to face him, his expression serious. "I love you, Zelda Ramsey. I have loved you since the day you looked at my disaster of an accounting system and did not run screaming. But I need you to know that I am serious about you, about us. I am not playing games or passing time." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I want to marry you if you will have me. I know we have not been together long, but I have never been more certain of anything. You are strong and brilliant and brave, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you can trust me with your heart." Tears pricked Zelda's eyes, but this time they were different. Not grief, but joy so overwhelming she could barely breathe around it. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Ryder's face split into a grin and he kissed her deeply, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. When he set her down, they were both laughing, and snow was falling around them like a blessing. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Unionville. Mrs. Chen attended, beaming with maternal pride, along with the ranch hands and a handful of neighbors. It was not fancy or elaborate, but it was genuine, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zelda felt a peace settle over her that she had not known was possible. The winter was cold, but they barely noticed, wrapped up in the warmth of new marriage and the work of running the ranch. Zelda proved to have a natural talent with the horses, gentling the difficult ones and training them with patient consistency. Together, she and Ryder made a formidable team, each complementing the other's strengths. In the spring, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had lost so many people she loved, and the thought of bringing a child into a world that could be so cruel scared her more than she wanted to admit. But Ryder held her hand and promised they would face whatever came together, and gradually her fear transformed into cautious hope. Their son was born in early December of 1878, squalling and red-faced and absolutely perfect. They named him Matthew, after Zelda's father, and she wept when she held him for the first time. But these tears were different from all the others she had shed. These were tears of connection, of continuing, of love strong enough to overcome loss. Ryder was a devoted father, walking the floors with Matthew at night, changing diapers without complaint, and gazing at his son with an expression of such tender awe that it made Zelda's heart ache. She watched him with their baby and thought about how far she had come from the grief-stricken, isolated woman who had arrived in Unionville. How she had learned that strength was not about never breaking, but about having the courage to break and then choosing to rebuild. The ranch prospered over the following years. Word spread about the quality of Ryder's horses and the fairness of his dealings, and business increased steadily. They expanded the operation, hired more hands, and built a larger barn. Zelda managed the business side with sharp efficiency while Ryder handled the training and breeding. They were partners in every sense of the word, building something together that was greater than either could have achieved alone. In 1880, their daughter was born, a tiny thing with Ryder's gray eyes and Zelda's dark hair. They named her Rose, and Matthew was delighted to have a little sister to protect and teach. Zelda sometimes watched her children playing in the yard and felt overwhelming gratitude for this life she had built from the ashes of loss. But it was not always easy. There were hard years when drought threatened the livestock, when illness swept through the horses, when money was tight and worry kept them up at night. There were arguments and disagreements, times when they both had to work to understand each other and find compromise. Marriage, Zelda learned, was not some fairy tale where love conquered everything effortlessly. It was a daily choice, a commitment renewed over and over through both good times and bad, but through all of it, they had each other. And that made all the difference. One evening in the summer of 1883, Zelda sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, 5-year-old Matthew chasing chickens in the yard while 3-year-old Rose napped inside. Ryder came to sit beside her, his hand finding hers automatically. "You remember the night of the storm?" he asked. "When you finally let yourself cry, of course. I knew then that I would marry you, that I would spend the rest of my life making sure you never had to carry anything alone again." Zelda smiled and squeezed his hand. "You have kept that promise." "Have I? Every single day." He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles. "You have given me more than I ever thought possible. A family, a partner, a purpose. I am the luckiest man alive." "I would argue that I am the lucky one. You saw me at my worst and loved me anyway. You taught me that being vulnerable was not the same as being weak, that I could be strong and still need someone. We are both lucky then." Matthew came running up the porch steps, breathless and grinning. "Papa, can we go see the new foal, please?" Ryder laughed and stood, pulling Zelda up with him. "Come on then. Let us go admire our handiwork." They walked to the barn as a family, Matthew chattering excitedly about the horses while Zelda carried a sleepy Rose on her hip. The new foal, born just 2 days ago, was nursing from its mother in the corner stall. It was a beautiful animal, all long legs and big eyes, and it would grow up to be valuable. "What should we name it?" Ryder asked Matthew. "Thunder," the boy declared immediately. "Thunder it is then." They stood there together, the 4 of them, watching the foal and its mother in the golden evening light. Zelda leaned against Ryder's shoulder and thought about how much had changed since that terrible day when the telegram arrived. How she had been so broken, so alone, so convinced that she had to carry everything by herself. But she had been wrong. She did not have to carry anything alone anymore. She had Ryder, who had held her when she finally let go and had continued holding her through every challenge since. She had her children, who filled her days with noise and chaos and incandescent joy. She had this ranch they had built together, this life they had carved out of hard work and determination and love. That night, after the children were asleep, Zelda and Ryder lay in bed talking about their plans for the future. They wanted to expand the house, add more rooms for the children and maybe future children too. They wanted to buy the adjacent property that had just gone up for sale. They wanted to start breeding a different line of horses, something unique that would set them apart. So many plans, Zelda murmured. Too many. No, just right. She rolled over to face him, studying his familiar features in the moonlight. Do you know what I love most about you? My devastating good looks and charm, she laughed. Besides that, tell me. You make me believe in tomorrow. Before you, I was just surviving one day at a time, never looking ahead because looking ahead meant hoping, and hoping hurt too much. But you make me want to plan, to dream, to build something that will last. You make me believe that good things can happen and stay happened. Ryder pulled her close, kissing her forehead. Good things do not just happen, my love. We make them happen. We work for them and fight for them and choose them every single day. That is what we have done. That is what we will keep doing. Together, Zelda said. Always together. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations, challenges overcome and victories celebrated. Matthew grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. Rose was spirited and fearless, always climbing something or exploring somewhere she should not be. In 1885, they had another son, Jacob, who was quieter than his siblings but had a gift for gentling even the most skittish animals. The ranch became one of the most respected horse operations in Nevada. People traveled from as far as California and Utah to buy from Ryder Finch, knowing they would get quality stock and honest dealings. Zelda's sharp business mind ensured they were always profitable, always looking ahead to the next opportunity. Together they created not just a business but a legacy, something their children could inherit and continue. In 1887, when Zelda was 31 and Ryder 36, they finally bought that adjacent property they had been eyeing. It doubled their holdings and gave them room to expand significantly. It was a risk, financially, but calculated and careful. They worked harder than ever that year, breaking new ground, building new structures, bringing in more horses. It was exhausting and exhilarating, and they fell into bed each night bone-tired but satisfied. One night in October, after a particularly long day of work, they sat by the fire in the expanded main house they had finally finished building. The children were asleep upstairs. The house was quiet, and outside the first frost of the season glittered on the ground. I have been thinking, Ryder said, staring into the flames. That is always dangerous, he smiled. I have been thinking about your father, about how he would be proud of what you have built. Zelda felt the familiar ache in her chest, but it was gentler now, softened by time and happiness. I think he would. I wish I could have met him, thanked him for raising such an extraordinary daughter. He was not perfect. He was restless, always chasing the next thing. It is part of what got him killed. But he survived losing everything in Missouri. He kept going for you. He brought you west so you could have opportunities. That took courage. Zelda nodded slowly. I never thought of it that way. I was always so angry that he kept taking risks, that he would not just settle somewhere safe. But maybe there was no safe place for people like us. Maybe moving forward was the only option he had. You are a lot like him, you know. That determination, that refusal to quit, those are his gifts to you. She thought about that, about the man her father had been and the legacy he had left. Not money or property, but qualities of character. Resilience, determination, the courage to keep trying even when everything fell apart. Maybe that was worth more than any material inheritance. I miss him, she said quietly. Even now, even with all of this happiness, there is still a part of me that misses him. Of course you do. That never goes away, but it gets easier to carry. It has, because of you. Zelda moved to sit beside Ryder, curling into his side. You taught me how to grieve without drowning in it, how to honor the people I lost while still embracing the life I have now. He kissed the top of her head. We taught each other. You taught me that strength comes in many forms and that asking for help is not the same as giving up. You taught me that love is worth the risk of loss." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling and the house settling around them. This house they had built, this life they had created, this family they had made. It was more than Zelda had ever dreamed possible in those dark days after her father's death. In 1889, their fourth child was born, another daughter they named Clara. The older children doted on her, and Zelda watched them with a full heart, thinking about how different her life might have been if she had not met Ryder that day outside the saloon. If she had taken work somewhere else, if she had left Unionville entirely, if she had never let herself trust him. But she had. She had taken a chance on a stranger's kindness, and it had transformed her entire existence. As the 1890s began, the American West was changing. The frontier was closing, towns were becoming more established, and the wild lawlessness of earlier decades was fading into history. But some things remained constant. The land, the work, the satisfaction of building something with your own hands and watching it thrive. Matthew, now 11, was already talking about breeding programs and bloodlines. Rose, at 9, could ride anything and was fearless in ways that both terrified and impressed Zelda. Jacob, at 5, spent hours in the barn just being near the horses. And little Clara was only a year old but already showing signs of her siblings' strong will. "We have done good work," Ryder said one evening as they watched the children from the porch. "We have," Zelda agreed. "Are you happy?" She looked at him, this man who had been a stranger once, who had offered her a job when she needed it most, who had held her when she finally broke and had never let go. "Happier than I ever thought possible." "Good, that is all I want, your happiness." "I have something even better than happiness. I have contentment, peace, a life that feels solid and real and mine." Ryder pulled her close. "Ours, a life that is ours." "Yes, ours." The years continued their steady march. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Zelda and Ryder grew older together, their love deepening into something rich and complex, layered with shared history and mutual respect. They had disagreements and difficulties, of course. No marriage was perfect. But they had learned how to fight fair, how to forgive, how to choose each other over and over again even when it was hard. In 1895, Matthew turned 17 and announced he wanted to attend agricultural college in California, to learn modern ranching techniques they could bring back to the ranch. It was both exciting and terrifying, the thought of him leaving, but Zelda and Ryder supported his ambition. They had raised their children to be independent, to pursue their own dreams, and they could not hold them back now. Rose, at 15, was already helping run the ranch like she had been born to it. She had no interest in leaving, wanted nothing more than to work with the horses and expand the operation. Jacob, at 11, was quieter but no less committed, his gentle way with difficult animals making him invaluable. Clara, at 6, was still figuring out who she wanted to be, but she had her mother's sharp mind and her father's kind heart, so Zelda had no doubt she would find her path. One night after Matthew had left for California, Zelda found herself unable to sleep. She slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake Ryder, and went to stand on the porch. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky in impossible profusion. She wrapped a shawl around herself and breathed in the sharp air. The door opened behind her. "Could not sleep?" Ryder asked, coming to stand beside her, just thinking. About Matthew, about everything. About how much has changed since we met, about how different my life could have been. Ryder wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Do you have regrets?" "Not a single one. That is what I was thinking about, how I could have so easily missed this, missed you, missed all of it." If I had left Unionville that day, if I had not been standing outside the saloon at exactly the right moment, if I had been too proud to accept your offer. But you did accept. You took a chance. Because I had nothing left to lose. And now, she smiled, now I have everything. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat. They stood together in the cold, watching the stars, and Zelda thought about the girl she had been at 21. Alone, grieving, convinced she had to be hard and closed off to survive. That girl would be amazed to see the woman she had become. A wife, a mother, a successful businesswoman, someone who had learned to balance strength with vulnerability, independence with connection. You remember, Ryder said, the night of the storm, when you finally cried. I think about it often. You were so scared. Not of the grief itself, but of letting me see it, of being vulnerable. I thought vulnerability was weakness. And now I know it is the bravest thing we can do, to let ourselves be fully seen, fully known, to trust someone else with our broken pieces. Ryder turned her to face him. You are the bravest person I have ever met, and I am grateful every single day that you let me in, that you trusted me with your heart. It is the best decision I ever made. He kissed her, slow and sweet, and Zelda felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt years ago when he first kissed her. Some things never faded, never diminished. Love was like that, she had learned. It did not stay the same, but it did not lessen. It evolved, deepened, became something richer and more complex. As the turn of the century approached, the Finch Ranch was firmly established as one of the premier horse operations in Nevada. Matthew came home from college full of new ideas, and together with his father, they implemented changes that increased both the quality and quantity of their stock. Rose married a neighboring rancher's son in 1899, a young man who loved horses as much as she did, and together they started their own operation just 10 miles away. Jacob remained at home, content to work alongside his parents and help manage the growing business. Clara, at 10, was developing into a formidable young woman with her mother's head for numbers and her father's way with animals. In 1900, Zelda turned 44 and Ryder 49. They were no longer young, their bodies bearing the marks of decades of hard work. But they were healthy and happy, surrounded by children and growing grandchildren, the beneficiaries of a life built through determination and love. One evening in late summer, they took a rare evening off and rode out to the edge of their property, to a high point that overlooked the valley. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, and the land stretched out before them in all its wild beauty. You remember when this was all just a dream? Ryder asked. When we talked about expanding, about buying more land, about building something that would last. I remember thinking you were crazy, that we were taking on too much. But you believed in it anyway, in us. Zelda smiled. I believed in you, and I believed that together we could do anything. We did we not? We built something remarkable. She looked out over the land they had worked so hard for, the ranch that had started as a modest operation and had grown into something significant. But more than the physical property, she thought about the life they had built. The family, the community, the legacy they would leave behind. We built more than a ranch, she said. We built a home, a family. We built love. Ryder reached over and took her hand. The night I met you, I thought you were the saddest, most determined person I had ever seen. I wanted to help you, but I also wanted to know you. To understand what made you so fierce, so strong. And now that you know, now I understand that you were not fierce in spite of your pain, but because of it. You had been hurt so badly, lost so much, but you refused to let it destroy you. You kept going. That is true strength. Zelda felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind that came from deep emotion and gratitude. I kept going because I had to, but you gave me a reason to want to. You showed me that life could be more than just survival, that it could be beautiful and full and worth fighting for." "We showed each other," Ryder said. "That is what partnership is. Two people making each other stronger, braver, better." They sat on their horses watching the sunset, hands linked between them, and Zelda thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The telegram that had shattered her world, the decision to stay in Unionville, the chance meeting outside the saloon. The night she had finally broken down and Ryder had held her. Every step, every choice, every moment of pain and joy had led her here. To this place, this man, this life. "I love you," she said. "I have loved you from the moment you held me while I cried, and I will love you until my last breath." Ryder's eyes were bright with emotion. "And I will love you beyond that, into whatever comes next." They rode back to the ranch in companionable silence, the easy quiet of two people who had been together so long they did not need words to communicate. When they reached the barn, they tended to the horses together, moving in the synchronized rhythm of long practice. Inside the house, the family was gathering for dinner. Matthew and his wife, Rose, and her husband, Jacob, and Clara. The table was crowded and noisy, full of laughter and conversation, and the beautiful chaos of a family that loved each other. Zelda stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it all in, committing it to memory. This was what she had built from the ashes of grief. This was what she had created when she finally allowed herself to be vulnerable, to trust, to love. This was the reward for her courage. Ryder came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Ready, always. They joined their family at the table, and Zelda looked around at each beloved face. Her children, grown and building their own lives. Her grandchildren, the next generation who would inherit this legacy. Her husband, the man who had saved her not by fixing her problems, but by loving her through them. She had refused to cry in front of anyone for so long, convinced that tears were weakness and vulnerability was defeat. But the cowboy had held her when she finally let go, and in doing so, had taught her the most important lesson of her life. That true strength was not about never breaking. It was about having the courage to break, and then choosing to rebuild, stronger and more beautiful than before. After dinner, when the family had dispersed to their various homes and activities, Zelda and Ryder sat by the fire as they had so many times before. The house was quiet, the day winding down to its gentle close. Ryder reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her skin. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how grateful I am. For you, for this life, for every moment that led me here. Even the hard moments, especially those, because they taught me what I was capable of. They taught me that I could survive anything, and that I did not have to survive alone." Ryder lifted her hand to his lips. "You never have to be alone again. Whatever comes, we face it together." "Together," Zelda echoed. She leaned her head on his shoulder and watched the fire dance, feeling the steady beat of his heart and the warmth of his presence. This was home. Not the house, not the ranch, but this connection between them. This love that had grown from a moment of vulnerability into something unshakable. In the years that followed, Zelda and Ryder continued their work, though they gradually handed more responsibility to their children. They became grandparents multiple times over, delighting in watching the next generation grow. They traveled a little, visiting Rose and her family, attending Matthew's lectures at the agricultural college, where he eventually became a professor. They took trips to places they had always wanted to see, making memories in their later years that were just as precious as those from their youth. But they always came back to the ranch, to the land they had built their life on. It was their foundation, their constant, the physical manifestation of everything they had created together. In 1910, At age 54, Zelda became a great-grandmother for the first time. Holding that tiny baby, she thought about the cycle of life, about loss and renewal, about how love persisted through generations. She thought about her own mother and father, about the siblings she had lost so young. They were gone, but they were not forgotten. They lived on in her memories, in the strength they had given her, in the blood that ran through her children's veins. "What are you thinking?" Ryder asked, sitting beside her while she held the baby. "That life is long and short at the same time, that we lose people but we also find them. That love is the only thing that really matters in the end. You have become quite philosophical in your old age," she laughed. "I prefer to think of it as wisdom." "Fair enough. And what wisdom would you pass on to this little one?" Zelda looked down at the sleeping infant, so small and perfect and full of possibility. "I would tell her to be brave, not fearless but brave, to let herself feel everything even when it hurts, to trust that she can survive the hard things, and to let people love her even when it is scary." "That is good wisdom. It is what you taught me." Ryder leaned over and kissed her temple. "We taught each other, remember?" "Yes, we did." As the baby slept in her arms and Ryder sat beside her, Zelda felt a profound sense of peace. Her life had not been easy, had been marked by loss and hardship and struggle. But it had also been marked by tremendous love, by partnership, by the satisfaction of building something meaningful. She had started as a girl who refused to cry, who thought vulnerability was the enemy. And she had become a woman who understood that vulnerability was the gateway to everything worth having. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of the next generation. Matthew and Jacob ran the operation with skill and innovation, incorporating new techniques while maintaining the quality and integrity their parents had established. Rose's ranch became just as successful, and together, the family holdings represented one of the most respected horse breeding operations in the West. Zelda and Ryder stepped back more and more, content to advise when asked, but allowing their children to make their own decisions and their own mistakes. It was hard sometimes, watching them struggle with challenges, but Zelda remembered her own journey and understood that some lessons could only be learned through experience. In 1915, at age 59, Zelda published a small book about ranch management and horse breeding, drawing on decades of practical experience. It was not a bestseller, but it became a respected resource in ranching communities, and she was proud to have documented what she and Ryder had learned. It was another kind of legacy, knowledge passed on to help others build their own dreams. Ryder, at 64, began teaching some of his training techniques to younger ranchers in the area. He had a gift for patience and communication, and people responded to his gentle, consistent approach. He found satisfaction in this new role, in shaping the next generation of horsemen. They grew older together, their bodies slowing but their connection as strong as ever. They still held hands when they walked, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still chose each other every single day. Their love had evolved from the passionate intensity of youth into something deeper and more sustaining, a love built on decades of shared experience, mutual respect, and unwavering commitment. One evening in the spring of 1918, when Zelda was 62 and Ryder 67, they sat on the porch watching the sunset as they had countless times before. The ranch was peaceful, the horses grazing in the distance, the mountains standing eternal against the sky. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Zelda asked. "When we met outside the saloon all the time, I think about how close I came to not being there at all. I had planned to ride straight home, but something made me stop in town first." "Fate," Zelda said. "Maybe. Or maybe just luck." Either way, I am grateful for it every day. She leaned against him. I was so lost that day, so broken, I did not think I would ever feel whole again. But you did. Because of you, because you saw past the walls I had built and loved me anyway. Ryder turned her face toward him gently. I loved you because of those walls, not in spite of them. They showed me how strong you were, how hard you had fought to survive. But I also loved getting to see what you were like when the walls came down, when you finally let me in. It was the scariest thing I have ever done. And the bravest. She kissed him softly. Thank you for holding me that night, for being patient with me, for teaching me that vulnerability was not weakness. Thank you for trusting me, for choosing me, for building this life with me. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of sage and earth. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied, and another answered. I have had a good life, Zelda said quietly. Better than I ever dreamed possible. We are not done yet. No, but if we were, I would have no regrets. I would be content knowing that I loved and was loved, that I built something meaningful, that I faced my fears and came out stronger. Ryder pulled her closer. We have years yet, adventures still to have, grandchildren and great-grandchildren to watch grow, books to read, places to see, quiet evenings like this to enjoy. Yes, all of that, she smiled. But mostly, I just want more time with you. More mornings waking up beside you, more evenings watching the sunset, more of this ordinary, extraordinary life we have built. That is what I want too, just more time, more years, more everything as long as it is with you. As darkness fell and the stars emerged, they remained on the porch, holding each other, content in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious. A love that had weathered every storm, a partnership that had only grown stronger with time, a connection that would endure beyond whatever years remained. Zelda thought about the girl she had been, standing alone with that telegram in her hand, convinced she had to face everything by herself. That girl could never have imagined this, could never have believed that letting someone in would lead to such profound happiness. But she had taken a chance, had allowed herself to be vulnerable, and it had changed everything. She had refused to cry in front of anyone, guarding her grief like it was precious. But the cowboy had held her when she finally let go, and in that moment of breaking, she had discovered something infinitely more valuable than her carefully maintained walls. She had discovered that love required vulnerability, that connection required courage, and that the strongest thing she could ever do was trust someone else with her heart. And she had been trusting him with it ever since, through every joy and sorrow, every triumph and challenge. Through the building of this ranch, the raising of their children, the quiet moments and the dramatic ones, through everything that made a life rich and full and meaningful. As they finally stood to go inside, Ryder paused and pulled her into a long, tender embrace. I love you, Zelda Finch. Now and always. And I love you, forever and beyond. They walked into the house together, hands linked, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring, because that was what they did. They faced it together as they always had, as they always would. The years ahead would bring more changes, more challenges, more joys. There would be loss, because that was inevitable in a long life. But there would also be love, constant and enduring, the foundation upon which everything else was built. And when Zelda looked back on her life, when she traced the path from that terrible day with the telegram to this moment of profound contentment, she understood that every single step had been necessary. The pain had taught her strength, the loss had taught her gratitude, and the fear had taught her courage. But most importantly, the cowboy who had held her when she finally let go had taught her the greatest lesson of all. That vulnerability was not the end of strength, but the beginning of love. And love, she had learned, was worth every risk, every fear, every moment of uncertainty. It was worth everything.